Greetings, everyone. This evening, we are together again at the 42nd video of the Divine Order and the Universe Reading and Commentary series. Welcome, dear Gültekin.
Good evening, everyone.
Last week, we had read an introduction to the topic of mediumship. This evening we will go deeper into this topic. Considering the fact that the term mediumship evokes so many different concepts and images in our minds, I am sure the passages we will read will be very beneficial for our dear friends. Indeed, so far, we have not read such a detailed spiritual communiqué on mediumship, explaining the mechanism in this way. Before you watch this video, I would like to suggest you to watch our 41st video, so you can have a better idea about what we discussed last week. Alright, let me start reading. The farther the being that will send influence to a man is from that man, that is, the greater the difference is in evolution between them, the more the numbers of the transformative fields or transformer stations that influence will go through until it reaches where that man is. On the other hand, the closer the being that will send influence and the man, that is the medium, that will receive that influence are in regard the fluidity, the smaller the numbers of transformer stations in between are. More or less evolved beings that are closest to the world can make connection with some mediums they can contact, without going through transformer stations directly. This is because magnetic fields of these are close enough to be able to contact each other without transforming. For example, when some people need to go under the possession of these kinds of simple beings because they need to be tried and tested, then beings in duty stick such simple beings to those people. In this way, obsessions occur and the simple being who is the obsessor can send its influences to that man directly, without needing the way stations. Actually, such simple beings or obsessors do not have the power to be able to use some transformers. 4. This is an issue of evolution as well. Their comprehension is not suitable for this. They automatically stick to suitable people they encounter. Sometimes, these obsessors may be a crude milieu of transformation which is very close to the world, and are used as a station by higher beings. Yes, with this passage, the book introduces us to a topic many people are very interested in: obsession.
Yes. Now, when we talk about closeness, this is not about the distances between us. I mean, when we say I feel very close to this or that person, this expresses a meaning related to the sympathization. And this passage, the distance mentioned, between a being sending an influence and a human tat will receive this influence, expresses the many levels of evolution between a being and a human. And longer the distance, or farther the being from that man, then more number of transformers or resistors are needed to decrease the intensity of the initial influence. We had talked about this need last week and gave the example of electricity produced in a dam and how its voltage needs to be lowered phase by phase until it reached the light bulb in our living room.
Well, this evening we have technical problems. We tried a few times, but it seems that dear Gültekin's internet connection is erratic, and we cannot hear him properly. So, I will continue by myself until he can join me. Yes, last week we had talked about the regions of influence around the world, and the closest one to our world is the densest of those regions. And backward beings exist in that densest region of influence. These beings are kind of earthbound souls, or still in the less developed levels of their development, the energy bodies of the deceased persons that have strong bond to the earthly cravings or sensuality. What keeps them in that densest region of influence around the world? Our dear friends may remember that we had read in the Divine Order and the Universe that each being in matter part is inherently a duality unit, that is being's development advance by making choices between two sides of the conscience mechanism. That is, between the earthly cravings or sensuality side and the duty side. And as you may imagine, crude emotional and psychological states, unless we transform these into subtler states, can hinder our easy transition to the spatium after our body dies. They become like heavy chains holding us down, closer to the densest region of influence, which is also closest around the world. And we read here, as Gültekin said before his connection was out, greater the distance between the being's level of development that is sending an influence and level of development of the human that will receive this, more numbers of transformers and stations are needed to decrease the intensity of that influence. Because the degree of development between such a being and a human is too big, hence, the influence of the being is too intense, too strong. Yet, we read here that, because the backward beings that remained or exist in the close vicinity, hence, the denser region of influence around the world don't need such transformers and stations. Because the distance between such beings and a human living in the world is not that great. Because their magnetic fields are close enough to allow such easy contact. Moreover, such simple beings can stick to a human, but only if that human need to be tried and tested by the beings in duty. Obsessions and possessions occur in this way. For something to stick to another thing, there must be a suitable surface for the former can hold on to. That is, if there is a suitable or matching frequency in the magnetic field of a human, then such a simple and backward being can sympathize with such backward frequencies of a human. Of course, the beings in duty utilize such matchings between simple beings and human as an opportunity to teach an important lesson to a human being, as well as to that simple being. Soon, we will read more detailed information about these topics and their mechanism. If you remember, last week, we had mentioned that years ago, doing spirit seances on Ouija boards was a fad, probably still is. And I had mentioned the type of questions people generally asked during such attempts to contact deceased people's souls, questions based on personal interests, on emotional and sensual needs. Now, after reading this passage, you may easily understand the need to be careful while opening the doors of our perception, of our magnetic fields to any kind of beings, as we searching answers to our questions. Again, last week we had mentioned that actually, each of us is a medium in receiving influences from our being. Still, some human beings are more sensitive, sometimes due to their genetic makeup, sometimes due their being's preparation over many lifetimes for such a duty. Still, the most important issue is from which region of influence, or from which station the communiqué is given. We must never forget that everything occurs through interaction of magnetic fields of beings, and in that sense, once again, I'd like to emphasize the importance of a healthy brain, healthy organism and a healthy psyche. Under adverse conditions like using consciousness-altering substances, or carrying lots of emotional baggage and unfinished business from our past and even past lifetimes, the abrasive quality of such adverse conditions may create holes or low vibrational zones and patches in our magnetic fields. Then, it becomes much easier for those simple and backward beings to become stick to such zones in our energy field. This is an issue of sympathization or fitting to each other. Just like the sides of a Velcro strip, you know the rough side is called the hook. And the soft side is called the loop. And one side can work only the other side exists. What I understand from this passage is that, if we don't want to be expose ourselves to such adverse influences, then we need to strengthen our magnetic field. And this requires self-knowledge, mastering our emotions and feelings, becoming present in our body as becoming more conscious and mindful, nurturing our body with good food and our mind with quality impressions, becoming more aware of our thoughts, thinking, emotions, intentions, biases, orientation, identifications. In short, old and new techniques, ways and methods of ensuring the health of our body-mind being. As we elevate our thoughts, emotions, intentions and actions toward higher frequencies such as love, compassion, altruism, and as we transform our low-level emotions like vengeance, anger, hate etc. so we can change our reality toward higher levels. And as we become more aware of the intention and reason behind the thing we want to do and have, we won't have neither side of a Velcro strip in our energy field, no hooks for backward beings to get attached, hold on or stick to. As you can guess, in a metapsychical research society like ours, we learn to recognize that two sides, regardless you are a medium or a seeker who want answers to your questions. Without proper knowledge about which regions of influence are activated by a medium's sensitivity or a seeker's curiosity, that ground of exploration gets highly slippery. In that sense, all of us need to be very careful, very discerning as we occupy ourselves with such matters. And, we read in this passage this interesting knowledge. Sometimes, these obsessors may be a crude milieu of transformation which is very close to the world, and are used as a station by higher beings. So, the beings in duty can even utilize those beings' lower level of development to bring out tests and trials for other beings. Then, in the divine system, regardless its level of development, each being has a function, and all beings, be it in lower and higher levels, can be instrumental each other's evolution. Again, we see that nothing is accidental in the divine order. Yes, I see your questions in the chat box. How can we prevent these hooks so backward beings cannot stick to us? Well, first, whatever is the lesson we need to learn has to be learnt. Then, your frequency and that being's frequency will not be in sympathy, will not be fitting to each other. Yes, there are rituals or practices to release such attached energies. However, if whatever acts like a hook in your system remains, then it will continue to attract similar influences from such beings, or the beings in duty will prepare new tests and trials for us. Because of this, the most effective protection is to self-knowledge. More we become more comprehending and aware about our inner world, about our own reality, stronger our magnetic field becomes. And you are asking, how to discern if the knowledge is given from higher level beings or not? Well, as a reply, I can suggest you to read and study the transcripts of the seances Mr. Ruhselman conducted. And the latest and the top example of his work is this book we read together, The Divine Order and the Universe. When we look at these seances, compared to the spirit seances which were a fad years ago, we easily see that Mr. Ruhselman had not asked a personal question to the beings and plans he received knowledge from. On the contrary, his questions were all about the developmental integrity of humankind, and of course, answers given were in accordance with his intentions. You are commenting that we don't do seances because now we can receive and read channelings. Then, this is a good opportunity to gain some knowledge of comparison. Please read and study this book, and then, compare the intuitions and information you gain with the intuitions and information from the spiritual works you mention in your comments. Indeed, the whole journey of the being, consequently, of the human being is about becoming more developed and comprehending and becoming subtler and subtler. Because of this, our main task is learning to discern the levels of the beings sending such influences, detecting the quality of sources such knowledge coming from, and also, detecting the quality of our parts resonating with such knowledge. Had not this was our main task, this book would have not dedicated such a long passage to this topic. Yes, because this next passage is a little bit long, I will read a part and pause to talk about that part. First of all, we will explain the communication mechanism constituting the most sublime form of mediumship, which is of a sublime being in duty with a medium in duty. An influence, departing from the being in duty and consisting of vibrations that can evoke certain meanings and impressions in the medium, starts to advance towards the medium chosen for this deed. As we have said, after going through a great number of transformer stations, it communicates with the higher consciousness of the being of that medium. After all, we had previously mentioned that only higher consciousness fields of the beings with other beings and with their spirits are open and they may contact this field. These influences landing at higher consciousness are immediately sent via the channel of unconscious to the medium center governing the function or capability which is needed to be utilized. Let's pause here and remember the function zones of the consciousness model given in this book. We have ordinary consciousness we use during our awake hours. The unconscious is a buffer zone, and all impressions we collect in a lifetime is restored in that field of consciousness. Higher consciousness is the field of our being's superconsciousness that is open to all influences. And the subconscious, please remember, this is not the subconscious known in psychology. The subconscious is the closed part of the superconsciousness where all past life memories of the being is stored, and it is only accessible under certain conditions. Now, we read in this passage what happens when a sublime influence is sent to a medium. Let's give an example of automatic writing or psychography. In this type of mediumship, writing is produced by a spiritual agency rather than by the conscious intention of the writer. We had mentioned such a medium when we talked about the spiritual communiqués given by Albert Pushhard. The medium of these communiqués were Pushhard's sister, and after the death of her brother, she started to receive telepathic messages from him. Yes, as such mediums write such messages, we can see them in action. We even see what they write on paper. However, the being of his late brother and, of course, the beings in duty allowing this connection, were sending influences to the higher consciousness of the medium's being, and the vibrations of these influences immediately sent to the medium's center governing the writing function via the channel of unconscious. Alright, I continue reading. It is a rule that influences arriving in the brain increase the motions of molecules constituting the brain centers. They increase their accustomed frequency of vibrations, which means that their capabilities and powers increase accordingly. For example, if here the medium needs to convey the incoming vibrations to surroundings by speaking, then influences in the higher consciousness immediately arrive at the centers related to speaking via the channel of unconscious and activate them. These influences are adjusted in accordance with the impressions to be evoked in them. Since every influence entering the brain must be reflected directly or via other ways surely to the consciousness center, during the coming of influence from the higher consciousness to the speaking center, this influence passes to the consciousness center as well. Influences passing to the consciousness lead this center to activity according to the purposes inherent in these influences, by increasing the vibrational frequencies of molecules in the center expressing the consciousness. Consciousness receiving influences in this way sends them back to the higher consciousness via the channel of unconscious. Here, the purpose of sending the influences to the higher consciousness is to inspect if they arrived exactly at the center or not. Being inspects this. Actually, inspection is done by the being in duty, but it appears as if this is done by the being of the medium. Yes, we continue reading the mechanism of communication in the most sublime form of mediumship, that is, the communication of a sublime being in duty with a medium in duty. Alright, we just said that the vibrations of the intended influences sent to the higher consciousness of the medium's being, and next, immediately sent to the medium's center governing the intended function via the channel of unconscious. Now, that center gets activated. Motions of the molecules of that center increase. Yet, this is a controlled communication that consists higher and sublime influences. So, the being or the plan takes precautions to keep the content and vibration of the influence sent intact. Because of this, that influence is sent back to the higher consciousness and to the being or the plan that sent that influence to be checked. Could the medium receive the influence as it should be received or not? To which forms did the influence arrived at the intended center take? Maybe you know that in radio and television, when broadcasting live material there is an intentional delay, a 7-second delay. The reason is to prevent undesirable material from making it to air. Similar to this precaution, the sublime being or plan checks if the forms the influence took in the medium's consciousness are correct ones or not. And as we read in this passage, this checking, this inspection is done by the being sending that influence, yet, it appears as if it is done by the being of the medium. I continue reading. In consequence of the inspection, after the state of the influence entering the center of speaking is judged as correct or wrong, this judgment again comes to the consciousness via the channel of the unconscious. Consciousness commands the center under its governance to do or not to do it in accordance with the correctness or wrongness of the judgment. And the center acts only after receiving this command, and if it has received the command to do it, it makes the medium speak by influencing the required organs. At that time, as the medium translates the meanings contained in the incoming influence into words, takes necessary words and images from the knowledge and impressions belonging to that life in the unconscious. It is not necessary to involve the subconscious for this immediately. If you remember, the subconscious is the field of consciousness where the impressions from past lifetimes are stored. We read here that it is not immediately necessary to use that material stored in the subconscious. So, in the process, first the mental and emotional imagery and impressions in the unconscious are utilized. Alright, I continue reading. However, if it is necessary to take some impressions from the past lives according to the quality of the communiqué to be given, then the center for speaking via the channel of unconscious again takes this knowledge from the materials in the subconscious. Since the influence cannot be spoken unless it again goes through the inspection of the being after it arrived at the center for speaking from the higher consciousness, this center should not act before the result of the inspection. Although the center for speaking appears as if it waits for it, actually here there is no waiting. This is because the completion of the necessary applications for the influences passing from the center for speaking to organs for speaking takes a few seconds, whereas the influences going from the consciousness to the higher consciousness via the channel of unconscious and going through the inspection and then going back to the consciousness via the channel of subconscious and, from there, the commands going to the center for speaking, is completed in milliseconds of time. Therefore, the center for speaking does not need to wait for the result of the inspection for a long time. For, at the time the influence is arriving just at the center for speaking, its inspection has been done and completed by the ways we mentioned above. As is seen in this mechanism, there is not much difference between the mechanism of dreams seen by the sublime influences we have just explained and the mechanism of such sublime communications. However, the difference is the process here is more vivid and has gone through the inspection mechanism. If you remember the mechanism of dreams, when an influence from sublime beings or from our own being is to be sent to us as a dream, the vibrations arrive at our unconscious and evoking images for a vivid and impressive dream. Difference here is, the medium is awake, receives that influence, but there is an inspection process of the content to be done by the being, before the influence takes forms as words to be spoken or be written by the medium. And most of the time, in the spiritual communiqué seances, we observe the mediums speaking in a delayed manner or haltingly, with small pauses between words or sentences. Here, the being who gives the communiqué, as we have said above, can also use, if necessary, the materials in the subconscious by appealing to it. These materials in the subconscious, as translated into words in the related center, begin to be spoken by the medium. The impressions belonging to them may not be evoked in the consciousness. These impressions, because they belong to past lives, actually do not exist in the consciousness. As advancing towards related centers via the channel of unconscious and coming by the consciousness, if they continue without activating the cells of comprehension there, comprehension of the consciousness center pertaining to the impressions of these does not wake up and man does not know them. In this case, this is automatic transfer. Here, we read man, but the plan means the medium. Well, in automatic transfer, the medium is unaware of what she or he speaks, because the being sending the influence appeals to the subconscious material. And because these impressions are not in the daily consciousness and in the unconscious of the medium. And if these evoked impressions of past lives does not activate the related centers in the consciousness of the medium as they pass via the unconscious, medium remains unaware of the forms these images will take. At the end of such seances, the medium does not know what has happened and said during the communication. Because this is an automatic transfer. I continue reading. In the inspected communication, there may be communiques whose meanings do not need to be reflected to the comprehension of the medium for various reasons. Although these communiques are reflected from the consciousness center to the higher consciousness to be inspected as well, comprehension does not occur in the consciousness, and this happens in this way. The consciousness center is very complicated. It is constituted by molecules combined with atom combinations that have various frequencies. Some parts of these molecule groups are particular to the comprehension and other parts do not pertain to the comprehension of man but only to the governing vibrations of the consciousness center over other centers, that is, to its vibrations activating them, and in the deeds the consciousness having the centers to do. If comprehension belonging to these deeds is not required to occur in the medium, then the frequency of incoming influences to the consciousness center does not have the quality to alert the parts of consciousness pertaining to the comprehension but a quality to alert the molecules pertaining to administrative deeds. Then, the consciousness center acts in a way to have the related centers activated in accordance only with the meanings of vibrations arriving at the related centers, but because the comprehension center is not active, that man cannot have the comprehension of that deed. And in this case, automatic communique and automatic activity are in question. If all the groups of comprehension molecules in the consciousness center are activated, then consciousness both renders the act of governance, and man, naturally, becomes aware of what he does. In this case, the aware communications are in question. Well, let me start with the first sentence of this passage. In the inspected communication, there may be communiques whose meanings do not need to be reflected to the comprehension of the medium for various reasons. What could be those reasons? Most probably, such extended control is to ensure that there is no leaking or mixing from the medium's own impressions, mental and emotional material. Because the mood and health of the mediums in such inspected communications have utmost importance. In case there is such undesired conditions present in the mediums and or even in the participants of the séance. Yes, we read in this passage how unaware and aware communications differ. For unaware communications, I can give the example of Edgar Cayce. He was going into trance for conveying the knowledge given to him, and because of this, he was known as the sleeping prophet. And for the aware communications, the best example is Mr. Attila, the medium of this book, The Divine Order and the Universe. He had told us that he was always aware of the content of the communiques. Therefore, his consciousness was active during the séances and he was aware of the content. Yes, I continue reading. In controlled communications, if the being giving the communique does not want to reflect the meaning of the communique to human comprehension, it then sends vibrations in such quality and value that these cannot be in a state to activate the molecules groups of comprehension in the consciousness center. They only activate the molecule groups of the consciousness center and ensure the constitution of the meanings belonging to the communiques given through it at those centers. In the meantime, as the consciousness center gives this command to the centers, the comprehension in the state of human is not aware of these deeds. 4. Molecules belonging to that part of the center are not in activity. However, the governing molecules of the consciousness bear upon the meanings of those vibrations which are reflected to the center and sent up for inspection. So, in this way, a non-comprehending control has been established via the channel we mentioned above. Therefore, the difference between the comprehending and non-comprehending controls is, in the case with the former, impressions activate the comprehension molecule groups in the consciousness, and with the latter, they do not alert these groups. Yes, in this passage, we read about the difference between the comprehending and non-comprehending controls in the controlled communiques, and I think the explanations are clear enough. And please notice that, so far what we read and discussed is about the most sublime form of mediumship, that is, when a sublime being in duty is conveying influences to a medium in great duty. Now, we will read about the ordinary versions of communications between beings and humans. Besides the mediums in great duty, the case here with the ordinary communications of mediums with average beings for the individual and small communal evolutions is actually similar to the previous one. The difference is that there is no control mechanism here. That is, the being does not inspect if the vibration it sent to the medium was transmitted correctly or not. It only suffices with sending its influences to the higher consciousness of the medium. It is not interested with how the medium receives or conveys these. However, the being giving the communique is controlled by superior beings. So, we read here about a big difference with the controlled and inspected spiritual communiques and the ordinary ones. Let's say a medium is receiving influences from a middle-level being. Yes, this being is under control of beings in higher levels, but the communication between this being and the medium is not inspected, is not checked to detect if the content of the message was properly understood by the medium or not. This sentence in this passage is so telling. It is not interested with how the medium receives or conveys these. I think this also points to the developmentary level of that being. Still, we can understand that such communiques have a multifaceted purpose. When human beings add more negative values to their duality units, by their choices, decisions and actions from the sensuality, from the earthly craving side of their duality unit, the equilibrium of the conscience mechanism gets disrupted. I am sure you remember this from our previous videos. And when that happens, the beings in duty and guides of such persons lead them to arduous tests and trials in life. It seems that, by the coming together of such persons due to their similar needs for such tests and trials, and their need to experience some adverse consequences of their deeds and actions, we witness or hear about the news of cults organized around a psychic that receives messages, and those messages are either ego-flattering or misunderstood as such by the mediums and their followers. Members of such cults and groups begin to think themselves as special, specifically chosen for salvation, etc., etc. And many other persons may gather around such a source of attraction. I give an extreme example, but such events happen. Later we hear in the news about a large group of people committed suicide by drinking poison because their leader or psychic received such a message. At the best, we hear about the examples of great frustrations, disappointments, quarrels and strife among the members of such cults, of course, from their ex-members. So, although we can only see such appearances of those events in life, we read in this passage that, like everything else in our universe, such low or middle-level communiques or channelings are also under the governance of a higher or superior organization of beings that utilize such beings to bring out such events containing many intended lessons for the persons involved, and of course, for the persons observe such events as well. Alright, I continue reading. Influences coming from that being to the higher consciousness of the medium, as subjected to the mechanism of initiator, guiding and propulsive influences which we previously explained in the topic of influences, are filtered through a few stations according to its distance to the medium and land in the higher consciousness field of the medium and communicates to it. Influences, from the higher consciousness via the channel of the unconscious, go to the center to which the organs to convey these influences to the surroundings are subject, that is, to the center for speaking. At the same time, they are reflected to the consciousness center as well. If the impressions belonging to the images wished to be evoked and required to come from the subconscious are not in a state to be reflected to the comprehension as they are taken from the subconscious via the channel of the unconscious, these vibrations are not of a quality to activate the cells belonging to the comprehension molecules of the consciousness. Then man cannot comprehend them. In this case, again, automatic communication is in question. However, since each center is always under the command and management of the consciousness center, no center can be activated without commands from it. The consciousness center receives these influences which do not alert comprehension molecules in it and sends the necessary commands to the required centers according to these influences. Sometimes, incoming influences are of a quality to evoke the images belonging to the meanings they carry at comprehension cells of the consciousness. That is, they are in a state suitable to the vibrations of comprehension molecules of the consciousness center in order to activate them. Then, the medium goes into action by knowing the deed he does. Nevertheless, in most of the communiques, this activity occurs with comprehension. As it is seen here, the consciousness center, unlike the previous group, is not subject to an inspection mechanism to give due command to the execution center. Meanings coming from the being are executed by the center without inspecting their correctness. Because of this, in this kind of communications, situations besides mixing of impressions taken from the unconscious in between the communiques as well as impressions taken from the subconscious and not subjecting them to inspection may sometimes result in alteration in the meaning of the communiques, their degeneration, or conveying the opposite meaning the being wishes to express. Frequent or rare occurrences of such situations depend on the capabilities of the mediums, degree of power of the being sending the communique, and the conditions of the structure and the milieu. 4. It should be remembered that during the communique, comprehending or automatic thoughts, wishes of the sitters or assistants in the session influence the mediums, even in spite of those assistants. And this happens as such. This influence can never go to the higher consciousness field of the medium and cannot alter the communiques, but by utilizing the channel of unconscious which is open to the consciousness at that time it can easily influence the consciousness field and may bring about more or less indistinctness. This indistinctness, which emerges in the consciousness according to the intensity and variety of these influences coming from the surroundings, may hinder the flux of influences coming from the higher consciousness. 4. The contact field of the unconscious that carries the influences coming from the higher consciousness and of the consciousness becomes more or less occupied by the influences coming from the surroundings. In this case, centers begin to make the medium say strange words by these mixed and confusing influences they receive from, on the one hand, the subconscious and on the other, from indistinct consciousness. All of these states are not purposeless and in vain, but are states arranged by the beings in duty for the increase of refining experiences of the mediums and others around them. Here, there are innumerable factors such as development of capabilities and attention of the assistants and the mediums, testing their good or ill intentions and measuring their degrees of courage, resolution, and perseverance through their behaviors in the face of the consequent misapprehensions. Well, there are very important points to ponder on in this passage. In a spiritual communique séance, there is a medium that will receive the influences sent and express these as spoken or written words, as replies to the operator of the séance that will direct and conduct the séance by asking questions, and also, the other participants we call as assistant or sitters. So, in case the participants are too tired, mentally preoccupied with other things, having different personal agendas, then the mutual magnetic field they bring out becomes affected. The flow of the communications quality can be greatly affected. If some of them are hungry or ate too much, if the séance gets longer, they may have immediate biological needs, or their emotional states, the time of their next meeting or errand, etc., etc. And also, external conditions. If the séance room has been properly sound insulated, some noises may prevent the concentration of the participants. Or, if the room is too brightly illuminated, this may also affect the concentration process. We read and study such states of the participants and the results of such states on the quality of séances in the earlier works of Mr. Ruhselman, and also, from the séances of Mr. Eric Dull while communicating with the Plan of the Faithful. At some points, the plan scolds the participants, telling them they should have prepared questions or better questions. They should have studied the content of the previous week's séance. So, as you can easily see, this is all about the peak performance of all participants, each of them has to strengthen their spiritual muscles, their perceptual muscles, so to speak. The operator needs to ask good quality questions and acts as lighting rod for attracting higher level influences. The medium needs to be a clean and proper vessel, both in his or her personal life and in the sense of psyche, and of course, other participants need to be centered. Their thinking and questions need to be aligned with the content of the séance conducted. In short, if they don't want any interference from simple beings, and if they wish to sustain the distinctness of the messages given, all participants have to have an impersonal stance and approach towards the work to be done, knowing that the messages will be given for helping the further development of the humankind, not for their personal interests and curiosity. I am sure you agree with me if I say there is a big difference between a question asked about a participant's future partner in marriage and a question asked about the workings of the universal laws. And there is a wide spectrum of questions in varying degrees of quality within these two questions. Just as we have a wide spectrum of choices and decisions to be made between the two opposites within our own duality unit, from the side of sensuality, the side of earthly cravings, or the side of duty. Similarly, we even see the varying topics in the religious book to the questions raised due to an event or experience of a prophet or of the followers and disciples. Of course, even the prophets didn't start sharing the revelations right away. They were trained, prepared to this great duty stage by stage, through the events in their life that are arranged toward a specific direction by the beings in duty, by the plan of duty. Yes, I think it is better stop reading at this point for this evening. Next passage has more explanations about the automatic communications, and again, a long one. So, I hope, next week, we can read and discuss with Gültekin, with a better internet connection. Let me reply a question before we say goodbye for this evening. One of our friends commented, I think hospitals are suitable places for obsessor beings. Well, such interactions happen in the hospitals, but especially for the healthcare staff. Because, just imagine, there is an inpatient, expected to be surrounded by his or her family members while dying, but no one knew about his or her passing. A part of such a person's energy may get stuck to a loving and compassionate nurse, as an attempt to fulfill this last desire. Still, such events are temporary, as the being of such persons experience the accounting period in the spatium, their hold in worldly matters and persons loosen eventually. However, such events may appear more lasting and permanent in the possession cases, or in cases of schizophrenia. In Europe, there are schools of therapy for teaching mental care professionals the magnetic field protection techniques while working with such patients. More aware people become about such matters, better they know how to deal with these. The most common example of incoming negative influences is the evil eye. Yes, the magnetic fields of some people are strong, but they are unaware about the influences they send out to their vicinity. They cannot control their energy, especially if they don't comprehend their emotional states at all. As they compare themselves with others' situations, gains, beauty, etc., they may send out adverse or counterproductive influences to the subject of their attention. Well, we try to keep young children from such influences of evil eye by various methods. The most well-known is to stitch a small evil eye protection bead to their clothes. And of course, because as newborns, their magnetic field are not strong as the adults' magnetic fields, so they cannot protect themselves. But, if persons that are known as having evil eye can become aware of such adverse results of their attention produce on other people's magnetic fields, they may orient towards the healing practices. If they can do this, they may become strong healers. And, another important point we have to remember when we talk about influences coming from simple and backward beings. First of all, this is not a one-sided connection. For a connection, for a communication, the sides are needed. We had talked about Velcro strips, just like this. For something to be stuck or hooked to another thing, there must be a suitable surface for this to happen. It does not happen spontaneously, arbitrarily, accidentally. And of course, when we hear the term of obsession, we generally think of the extreme examples of it. Yet, with its description here, we can say that obsession is a person's becoming exposure to some sensual, undeveloped, crude influences. Let's say, with some incoming influences, an interaction happens in my magnetic field, and this influence brings out some images, emotions, feelings and thoughts within me, and in turn, this interaction brings out a state and I experience it. And I can define such a state as this is not me or as if it does not belong to me. I am seeing your comments in the chat box. Yes, you are right. The flow of knowledge and information and inspiration from higher consciousness to scientists, musicians, inventors are also types of mediumship. I don't think we need new and sensational knowledge to be received by new spiritual communiqués. I don't think that humanity needs new knowledge to change its habitual ways. The crucial knowledge was given to humankind many times throughout the history, but could we digest them properly? Had we properly internalized all that knowledge, we would not be searching for more, and we could be living that knowledge, manifesting it in our life. Yes, let me say good evening to you all, hoping to see you next week, with new questions and comments coming from you. Thank you for your attendance.